A harbor vanished so completely that even the maps refused to remember it. Sailors whispered about docks that disappeared overnight. Merchants swore their ships once sailed into a bustling port, only to find empty shoreline. The town's name was scrubbed from official charts. And yet, a few old journals still hold the truth. England in the 1700s was a nation shaped by the sea. The Royal Navy grew stronger each year. Trade routes expanded across oceans. Coastal towns became centers of wealth and power. Along the southern shoreline, ports were the arteries of the empire. They carried goods, men, and the very identity of a growing nation. In that era, maps were not just tools. They were proof of existence. A port listed on a chart was a place that mattered. A harbor that vanished was a mystery that challenged the state itself. The story begins in a small coastal town known for its harbor. It sat on a natural bay that sheltered ships from storms. The harbor's name was once spoken with respect among merchants and naval officers. It was a stop for vessels traveling between London and the Atlantic. It supplied the Navy with timber and rope. It also served as a place where sailors could rest, drink, and share stories of distant lands. The townspeople were mostly dockworkers, shipwrights, and fishermen. Their lives depended on the tides and the ships that arrived each day. The harbor gave them identity. It gave them purpose. It also gave them security, because a busy port meant income and protection. But the late 1700s were not only a time of prosperity. They were also a time of change and conflict. England was expanding its colonial reach. The Navy grew larger. The country's economy shifted from local trade to global domination. In this atmosphere, small harbors became both valuable and vulnerable. They attracted attention from officials who wanted control over shipping routes. They attracted private investors who wanted to profit. They attracted rival towns that envied their success. In the years before the harbor disappeared, there were signs of strain. The bay began to change. Sand shifted in unusual ways. Local fishermen reported strange currents. Some ships found the entrance more difficult to navigate. The dockworkers noticed the shoreline creeping outward, as if the sea were slowly swallowing the land. But these warnings were ignored. Officials believed the harbor was safe. Merchants believed the profits would continue. The town's leaders believed their port was too important to fail. Then came the storm season. The storms of the late 1700s were not rare. But this period brought unusually violent weather. Ships were damaged. Docks were weakened. And the harbor's natural defenses were tested beyond their limits. For the first time in decades, the community felt fear. The harbor, once a symbol of security, began to feel unstable. Despite these fears, life went on. Ships continued to arrive. Trade continued. People continued to live as if nothing could destroy the place they relied on. The harbor remained on maps. The harbor remained in official records. The harbor remained real. But reality was about to change. The day the disaster began, the town was unusually quiet. The air carried the smell of rain and seaweed. Fishermen stayed ashore. The docks were nearly empty. Merchants watched the horizon with concern. Even the children avoided the shoreline. By noon, the wind began to rise. It came from the west, pushing waves toward the bay. The water moved with a strange force, as if the sea had decided to reshape the coastline. The harbor's entrance, which had always been calm, grew chaotic. Boats began to drift. Lines snapped. Men shouted orders, but their voices were lost in the roar of the wind. A small fleet of merchant ships had arrived earlier that morning. They were loading cargo when the storm began. The captains knew the bay's waters. They believed they could ride out the storm. But the sea had changed. The currents moved in new patterns. Sandbars formed where none had existed. The ships were trapped. One by one, they were pushed toward the shore. The dockworkers attempted to secure the vessels. They tied ropes to posts, and they dug channels to guide the water. But the storm was relentless. The harbor's natural barrier began to collapse. The waves crashed against the wooden docks. The docks splintered like dry branches. Men were thrown into the water. Screams filled the air. The town's leaders gathered at the highest point near the shore. They watched the harbor they had built and relied upon being destroyed in front of their eyes. They understood the danger. They knew the town could not survive without the harbor. They also understood that the sea was not simply a force of nature. It was an enemy that could not be bargained with. The decision was made to evacuate. There was no time to save the ships. There was no time to save the goods. The priority became the people. Families gathered what they could carry. The dockworkers left their tools. The merchants abandoned their warehouses. The town emptied toward inland roads, leaving behind the docks, the warehouses, and the memory of prosperity. As the town moved away, the sea continued to advance. The water pushed further inland. It swallowed streets and buildings. The harbor's outline disappeared under sand and waves. The remaining structures collapsed, one by one. The storm lasted through the night. When dawn arrived, the bay looked different. It was not a harbor anymore. It was a wide, empty stretch of coastline with scattered debris. But the worst part was still to come. When the authorities tried to record the event, they faced a strange problem. The harbor's official maps were outdated. The new maps had to be redrawn. But no one could agree on what the coastline had been. The land had shifted so dramatically that the old charts no longer matched reality. Even those who had lived there could not describe it accurately. In the days after the disaster, rumors spread. Some said the harbor had been cursed. Others claimed it had been intentionally destroyed by enemies. A few insisted the sea had simply taken what it always wanted. Whatever the cause, the result was clear. The town had lost its heart. And the country had lost a port that once mattered. The climax came when the government attempted to confirm the harbor's existence. Officials sent surveyors to document the new coastline. They brought maps, instruments, and men trained in measurement. They expected to find the bay and the remains of the port. Instead, they found confusion. The coastline had changed so drastically that the old landmarks were gone. The hills and cliffs that once framed the harbor now appeared in different positions. Sand dunes had shifted like moving mountains. The bay had been replaced by a wide, shallow plain of water. The harbor entrance had vanished. The docks were buried beneath sand. The warehouses were underwater. The very shape of the shoreline was different. Surveyors recorded their findings. They wrote reports describing a vanished harbor. They noted the impossibility of matching old maps with the new landscape. They described the town as a place that no longer existed. When the reports reached London, officials reacted with disbelief. They demanded verification. They requested further investigation. But each new expedition returned with the same conclusion: the harbor was gone. The town's name was no longer attached to any place on the map. The coastline had changed beyond recognition. In the months that followed, the tragedy became a scandal. Merchants demanded compensation. Naval officers demanded answers. The government faced pressure to explain how a harbor could vanish without warning. Yet the evidence was limited. The sea had destroyed the physical proof. The loss was not only economic, it was also emotional. The people who had lived there felt abandoned by history. They had been forced to leave their homes. They had lost their livelihoods. Their children had grown up without a harbor to remember. Their stories were told only in whispers, in journals, and in the voices of those who still lived. The surviving residents tried to rebuild elsewhere. Some moved to neighboring towns. Others joined the Navy or became traders. The port's former workers found jobs in other harbors. But none of them could forget the sense of being erased. The nation, meanwhile, attempted to fill the gap. Ships were rerouted. Trade was redirected. The Navy strengthened other ports. The loss of the harbor became a footnote in official records. It was mentioned in a few documents. It was discussed in a few meetings. Then it faded. Yet the vanished harbor continued to haunt those who remembered. Every map revision carried the same silence. The harbor's name was removed. The coastline was redrawn. The story was pushed aside, as if the sea had not only taken the port but also the memory of it. The final blow came when the last surviving witnesses died. With them went the last living proof of the harbor's existence. The journals remained, but they were ignored by those who believed that if a place did not appear on a map, it did not exist. The harbor's disappearance became a mystery that could not be solved. The sea had taken more than a port. It had taken a part of England's history. The harbor did not simply disappear. It was taken. The sea moved in and erased the docks, the warehouses, and the streets that had once carried the life of the town. When the storm ended, the shoreline looked unfamiliar, as if someone had redrawn the coast while the people slept. The town's name still existed in old papers, but it no longer belonged to any place anyone could find. The survivors left without turning back, carrying only what they could hold, while the wind continued to pull sand over the empty foundations. In the weeks that followed, officials tried to document what had happened, but every map they drew failed to match the coastline they saw with their own eyes. The harbor was gone, and with it went the proof that it had ever been there. Over time, the story stopped being spoken aloud. The memory became something people avoided, like a word that could summon the sea again. New maps were published, and the old ones were quietly removed. The town vanished from charts, and the nation moved on, as if the loss had never mattered. Years later, when the last witnesses were gone, the harbor became a rumor. A few journals remained hidden in attics and archives, but they were rarely opened. The coastline stayed quiet, and the sea kept its secret, leaving behind only the empty space where a port once existed in a silence that felt like the world had forgotten it ever belonged to anyone. Thank you for watching. New historical stories are published regularly.